even higher than that. So welcome to everyone who is joining us. Many of you have introduced themselves. We have people continuing to say who they are and where they're from. So welcome to all. If you haven't yet, let us know who you are. Please do. It looks like we have pretty good representation across the country as well. We have people joining from east to west, and so Vicky is saying the sound is cutting in and out when I'm speaking. Are others getting that? No, sounds okay. Okay, Vicky, you may need to just adjust your speaker volume. That might be the issue there. So welcome to everyone. We'll just give ourselves a few minutes until we have Michiko back, because they're going to actually start us off and let us know a bit of the background for this webinar and this time together. But in the meantime, I want to say that I'm so glad that you're all here and that we have this time together today. So I'm wondering, as we wait for Michiko, Evan, you were going to start us off in prayer. So I wonder if you could just give us a moment to ground ourselves and center ourselves in prayer.
Sure, no problem. Let's join our spirits together in prayer. Gracious, loving, and creative God, we're thankful for this time that we have together to share, to hear our stories, to learn from each other. And we ask that your Spirit be here with us as we meet across the country, and that our hearts be open to the things that we hear, our minds be opened, and we experience love and compassion and grace and solidarity. God, we're so thankful for the diversity you've placed in this world, and for Jesus, who came to earth and taught us how to walk a path of love and resistance. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen. So as we are getting started, we'll give a few moments to welcome Michiko back, but I wondered, Jordan, would you be able to start us off and just let us know a bit about this webinar and how it came to be?
Absolutely. Hi, folks. Welcome, everybody, and thanks for your patience with us as we get things going here today. It's always a challenge to make all these technical aspects work for everybody all at the same time, so we appreciate your patience. As you know, many of you know, we have the new Celebrating Gender Diversity resource that just came out online that's available to download on the United Church website. And we wanted, along with a resource, some real personal stories to go with that. As we know, I'm the kind of person that I learn from meeting people and from hearing their stories, and that makes the greatest impact in my life and helps me often to shift my perspective or my understanding, to deepen my awareness. So we invited a number across the country. We had so many we couldn't fit anybody in today. Maybe we'll have another one in the future, but we had a number of folks step forward to share their stories of what it means to be a transgender and or genderqueer person in the United Church of Canada, what it means to be a trans person of faith, and the challenges and the opportunities and the joys that come with that experience. So I hope that each of you today will find something in their stories to connect with. Think of your own experience of gender and something in their stories to expand in your awareness and deepen your awareness of the differences around you and the differences in God's creation.
Wonderful. Thanks, Jordan. So we have a chance to hear a story today, and we're going to hear from Cindy and Rita, Jordan, Evan, and Michiko. So Cindy, you're the first to start us off with a time of story, and I'm wondering if I can turn it over to you now. Oh, and your mic's still muted there.
I'll just start when I started. I'm muted?
No, you're good now.
It doesn't say that my
Looks like you're all
microphone
good.
is muted. Do people hear me?
Looks like you're all good.
Okay.
We can hear you.
Good. Good thing. So I can. I always wonder what people actually do. But anyway, so I didn't really. I didn't grow up in the United Church. I kind of grew up as an Anglican till I was about 10, and then my family left the church, just drifted away. And I was still always sort of like a spiritual person and things, but I wasn't really. I wasn't a part of the church. And actually, how I actually entered the church was I entered the church when I started coming out, when I started transitioning. And a friend of mine told me that there was a church in Toronto, Emmanuel Howard Park, where he thought I would be welcome even as a trans woman. And I didn't believe that, but I did go eventually, and he checked, and I went. And so it was Emmanuel Howard Park, and the minister there was Sherry DeNovo, who's turned out to be a good friend, NDP member of Parliament in Toronto. But so she was just she kind of helped make that place a welcoming place for me and for trans people. And it wasn't, it's not that they really understood things about trans people, but they just sort of understood that they shouldn't be, that we should be welcoming of trans people and of everybody. And I remember the first time I ever went there, this old lady came up to me and said, and made the first person who spoke to me made a big point about saying that everybody come here. So, that was just like a really great experience. And so I started, going to church, and that's how I actually entered the church. And, but I want to also say something about trans narratives, in that so often we read things like coming out stories or like that, and so many times, so often these trans narratives are actually geared towards cisgender people, that's non-trans people. So I'd like to try and, I don't want to perpetuate that. I'd like to tell the story that's needed to be heard for trans people. So sometimes that can be harder to hear than a story that's intended for cisgender people. So I just want to make sure about that I get that across. And I can give you an example of how this might be important. Is, you read in the Bible about there's some talk about eunuchs, such as the Ethiopian eunuch, or in Matthew 19:12, or in Isaiah, talking about positive expressions of a eunuch. You may say a eunuch is different than a trans person, and that's a trans woman. For sure, and there's some truth in that. I think there's overlap. And one of the things that I've noticed a lot of, like even Peterson Toscano, one of his, who's done a lot of great work and is a very positive artist for trans people, but he talked about eunuchs and how, and he talked about eunuchs and how they would be castrated, and how that, and he made it sound like such a terrible, terrible thing, and he didn't really realize that for trans people, some trans women, not all trans women, not all trans people, that some people born with testicles, having them removed is actually liberating. And so there's still this idea that it's, it's still from that non-trans or cisgender perspective. So I just want to, maybe warn you. So, living in Canada and in the United Church is, as a trans person, is, I feel very lucky to be in Canada and the United Church, in the sense that I have opportunities here, but it still can be a mixed bag. And sometimes the structures aren't really helpful for trans people, and we need to be aware of that. And they're kind of like a mixed bag and kind of dependent on good people like my friend Sherry, who welcomed me into her congregation, and had other people welcome me to the congregation, but I don't know that they really understood some of the things that were going on, and so it's hard to be really welcoming without knowledge. So I'm very happy for this opportunity. I can give you, I think we have to, in the United Church still, and in Canada for sure, come to an understanding that equality is different than equity. I know lots of people understand that, but it's really a true thing, where if we treat everybody equally, for people who are facing oppressions and are on the wrong side of power dynamics, being treated equally doesn't help. I remember when I was being settled, which I was in the last class that was settled, and I'm not bitter about it, but that's the way it is. And that's a joke. And so in settlement, the church would place you where you would go, and I got by far none of my classmates would have taken the job that I took. It was not preaching. It was a 3/4 time, and there was no, and I remember even I was talking with some people. There was some efforts at the church at the general council level even to sort of say, how can we work with sin? But I remember someone saying that we have to be true to the process, and the process wasn't helpful for me. So, and for trans people. So I think we've got to be careful about being too concerned with our process and not concerned enough about the differences that people face in that process. So I think that's something. And it was also, someone interviewed me for an Observer article, and I complained. I don't know if I complained, but I pointed out, maybe I complained, that I was underemployed, that I didn't get a full-time job, and that I wasn't in a preaching position. And when I was back at the general council office sometime, and somebody who was high up in there thought I was being ungrateful because they said, look, we got you a job, and I was expected to be grateful for getting a job that I don't think any of my classmates would have accepted. They would have turned it down. And so I just wanted to say that, we've got to be careful about those sort of things in the church. With respect to, like individuals' behavior, and I think that's something that's really hard to, and maybe that's part of what we're trying to do here, like individuals' behavior with respect to trans people or other people facing oppressions, is that, I think that's been pretty good, right? Like I do have a job, and I'm very happy about that, and I think, I don't face like a lot of like overt oppressions, although I think both in my settlement charge and in my current job, both times people have left the congregation when I came. And so I think those are things that have to be acknowledged. But so I don't think that's the individual's bigotry isn't the biggest problem in the United Church, although it does make things harder. Like when I was applying for jobs, I'm sure there's some that just took a look. Oh, Cindy's transgender. Let's get her out of here. And my pile went immediately my resume went right to the garbage. So I think we have to acknowledge that. I mean, I think it'd be lovely if we could figure out ways in which we could look at people who are facing different kinds of discriminations and oppressions and figure out how we can work with them and the larger community so that we can allow everybody to show their gifts and express their gifts. So and I know once when I was looking for work, I emailed another trans lady who had got a job, and I asked her, and I said, can you give me an advice on finding work, because I had not done that. And she said, she sent me back something that was really nice and sweet, and but she talked about, talking about how God loves me and God has a plan for me and all those things. And I was like, I'm not worried about God here. That's not the one I'm worried about loving me. It's the rest of the people that I'm worried about. So I think we have to keep that in mind. And it's just that, I think we've got to figure out ways in which we can recognize some of the barriers that people are facing and work with them on the barriers. And I know there's lots of things that have happened, such as this webinar, the diversity kit, the transgender diversity kit. I'm sure I have their name wrong, but Jordan can tell you what it is. And those things are great things. And I know I just saved that on my Facebook last night, and I got tons of people saying, very happy that exists, and I'm happy that it exists as well. So, there still needs to be there's still a lot of work that needs to be done. Try not to leave it up to individuals to do the right thing, because sometimes they do and sometimes they don't. One of the things somebody asked me once about what it's like, even just walking through the world as trans and walking through the church as trans, is that I said that it was like the that it was like moving in Jello, because everything just seems a little bit harder. Everything that I have to do seems a little bit harder. Like, for instance, at Presbytery just the other day, there was people were asking for someone to carry a pager for the chaplain, for the chaplaincy here in Regina. And they were saying that, do you want to be on call, and you get paid like a couple $100 a month or something to be on call. And I couldn't really, even though I could probably use the money, I couldn't really do that just because I don't want to go into a chaplaincy, into an emergency situation, and have to worry about if they're going to be accepting of a trans woman being there with them. So that was just something that just doesn't have an opportunity for me. And I don't know what the solution is for that, but I think that's just an example of how things are always, I don't want to say against you, but just make things difficult. And if I'm way over my time, then you should probably tell me. So am I good here, or?
I think you're about at your time.
Okay, well, I think I'll just let it go with that. I'll let go with that because I'll let it go there and let some other folks have some talking time. So I could go on forever.
Well,
not quite.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing your story, Cindy. And we'll have time for more discussion and questions at the end of our time as well. Sharon has just written a note that because of the wealth of information and stories that we're going to hear today, there is a chance that we may go over the hour a little bit. So just to let everyone know that our webinar today is being recorded, and you'll all be able to watch anything and re-access the whole thing at a later point. So thank you, Cindy. And I would invite Rita now to share story with us. So Rita, if you want to turn on your camera. There you are. And Cindy, if you wouldn't mind turning.
Perfect. Okay. Well, I'm fairly new to the United Church. I've only been with the United Church now for about 2.5 years. My story goes back, way back to when I was a kid. I was raised, and I'm going to speak of some denominations here, but do please understand, this story could be told with any number of denominations or churches, perhaps even United Church ones. I was raised Catholic, and having something different about me as a young child. I'm 61 now, so there was no resources back then. There was no internet. There was nothing to tell me that what I was okay. And I did the usual thing. I went hypermasculinity. If I tried harder to be a better boy, if I tried harder to be a better man, it would go away. And of course, given a Catholic background, there were some very staunch views on these sorts of things. Later on, mine is a story of rejection, but wait for the end because it's beautiful. Later on, I transferred over to the Pentecostal church after having a profound experience. And this caused a lot of discord with my parents, especially my dad. And here I was, family man by this point, with 3 small kids. And I remember the night he put me out of his home because I wasn't Catholic. So that was my first taste of real religious rejection. Now, it wasn't about being trans. I was still fighting it at that time, and in the evangelical church, well, the views on that are even more staunch. And believe me, if it could be prayed away, I would have done that 1,000 times over. But that didn't work either. So finally, at 50 years of age, I couldn't run anymore. I couldn't run from who I am. I need to tell my wife, my kids. I have 7 siblings. I need to tell them. I need to tell my mother. She's in her 80s. And I needed to tell my church. Mount Everest is a speed bump in a parking lot compared to that. Well, let's take the church side. By the way, family is still not very accepting at all. There's been just recently some good signs of movement there, but that's still a story that's unfolding. When I told my church, you see, I've always been a very devout person, 32 years in there. I'm always a person that pitches in and helps. My task at church, the thing I love to do is I ran the PowerPoint and the projector to put all the songs up there and the slides from the pastor for his sermon, things like that. When I told them I was removed from helping, a big part of my worship, it's gone. Then from there, it was so bad that I was not clean enough to pick up empty coffee cups in the cafe that they had. The welcome the church was that I was welcome to attend and sit and listen, but I wasn't welcome to participate in any other way. My wife still goes to that church sometimes. It's a difficult challenge. Eventually, I couldn't do it anymore. I couldn't sing songs. I couldn't sit there and so alone. Very, very, very alone. Feeling condemned, shamed. One of the pastors at that church told me, well, there's this church on York Street. I'm from Sudbury. There's this church on York Street. It happens to be St. Peter's United Church. He says, it's a church for you people. You should go there. That's after more than a decade, this church. Even the people in the board of that church, I'd served on boards before there. I'd done all sorts of things. You know, when I was taken out of the role of helping with the PowerPoint, there wasn't a single person that approached me to say, what's going on? You're hurting. Nothing. I kept going. My wife works weekends sometimes, so there's one weekend on, one weekend off. I still went to church. I know the place. I didn't know what the United Church was. I had nothing against any other church. It's just that and that's just what I did. Well, this particular Sunday, I got ready to go to church. My wife was at work. And I just couldn't bring myself to go back to that place and come out feeling worse than when I went in. Depression's a big thing. I knew that just around the corner from where I live in Sudbury is a nice little church, St. Luke's United Church, happens to be United Church. I knew its time for its service was later. I go by the sign a gazillion times a day. I decided, you know what? I want to go to church. I'll just go there for this Sunday. And I've been to church because my yearning has always been to worship. And I went. Reverend Aaron Todd is the minister there. I went in and what I heard. No, I went in, understand, not like you see me now, but cross-dressed as a male because I'd been dressed to go to another church. And I hung on every word. It was wonderful. When it was over, I cried. Because what's going to happen when they find out about the real me? I couldn't bear another rejection. So I asked the minister, I asked Reverend Aaron if we could do coffee. So later that week we did. And I told her about me. And once again, all this time I'm still presenting as a male. This is the first of any of us that she had. And this is where the story begins to get wonderful. She said, keep coming as you are, male, for now, because it was coming up on the Christmas season. And she says, I promise you in the new year, we'll deal with this. And I said, okay. And I mean, it's a lovely little church, mostly older people, least likely to accept, one would think. My goodness, was I wrong. So we get through the Christmas season, and they've gotten to kind of know me, and I've gotten to kind of know them. Family, right? Yeah. In January, she starts. You know, she went out and met with every single person in that congregation. She met with them personally. And she talked about me. And then, of course, they were going to have a congregational meeting to see, well, what are they going to do? I wrote them a letter, which later on I found caused most of them to cry. It wasn't my intent. And I remember waiting for that. It was in February. And it was one of those really cold, blizzardy sort of days. It's a Saturday. This is when they were having their special little meeting. I was outside cleaning the driveway. I mean, oh, what a sight I was. There I am out there covered with snow blown and crusted on me, snotsicles frozen to my face, the whole bit, right? Really, really becoming. Waiting for the phone call to come on myself. And it came. It was Reverend Erin, and she says, well, we've had our meeting and I want to let you know what the result was. I says, okay. I was ready for rejection. She says, it's unanimous. The congregation wants you to know. You're welcome to come, however you like. Well, I know the weather didn't change, but to me the sun came out, there was spring flowers, there was everything. I'm out there crying and tears freezing to my cheeks. I was so happy. But then here's the second thing. And this is the part that's astounding and to me speaks more to Christianity than anything. She said to me, she says, one more thing, the congregation wants to apologize to you. I was dumbfounded. Apologize to me for what? You've just given me the most amazing gift. She says they want to apologize to you for even feeling you had to ask. I went to church first time that Sunday was my stuff. Got to sit there and worship God and thank Him for who I am. I was invited up to light the Christ candle. Imagine, I was clean enough. One of the men in the congregation came and sat in the pew beside me for support. One of the men. Since then, I'm not the trans woman at church. I'm just Rita. Just Rita. Have I given them any training or this or that or affirming this or that? No. They simply believe me. Simply believe. I cannot tell you how much that means. It's just now that they're finally saying, you know, you go and do all these speaking and things. Why don't you come and do one with us and explain to us a little bit? But I want you to give you the key to all this, at least as I can see it. Maya Angelou, the great philosopher and poet from the United States, just recently passed. She said it well. And she was speaking about the heart. When I tell you something about me, believe me the first time. They believe me. They still don't know what it's all about. They don't. Doesn't matter. I'm Rita. That's it. Do they make mistakes on pronouns once in a while? Yes. But that is so easy to bear. Some churches, when they say everyone welcome should have an asterisk beside that statement. And at the bottom in small print it should say, some conditions may apply. My church is not enough for my family. They've been so good to me. So after facing so much rejection because of religion, to be accepted and believed without having to be understood. I still thank God every time I go to church for the way He opened those hearts. My family, my wife still can't accept me like this. For her, I still present as a man. But please understand your families too. For my wife, she has to go to bed with her husband's mistress. For my kids, I'm the woman that's taken away their dad. The grandkid, the grandfather for their grandchildren. That's how it feels in the heart. So as you're dealing with trans persons, please also consider our families that struggle. I asked a lot of them. I have no choice about who I am. But they have to choose to accept. I believe theirs is the harder struggle. Thank you. Or you can go on to the next person. I need a little time to just recover.
And now I'm unmuted. Hello, everybody. It's Jordan Sullivan. Wow. I don't know about you, but thankfully Sharon did a Kleenex run. That was beautiful, Rita. Thank you so much for sharing. You stated things very powerfully today. I knew you would. I knew you would. First time I heard Rita's story, I was in tears on the phone, just like today. So thank you. So I'm going to share just a little bit of my story. I'm going to make mine a little shorter, and I think by the end you'll understand why. I'm not going to share with you my story of growing up because I want to focus on just a few of the things that I've learned as I've transitioned over the past 5 years. For me, transitioning is a spiritual process that goes right to the fundamental nature of who I am as a human being. Transitioning isn't about correcting my gender, and it's not about correcting my sexuality. It's about unifying my body and my soul. So, what have I learned? Church and society taught me, growing up, that all the things about me that didn't fit into the boxes that I was assigned were evil. What I've learned instead is that evil is to inflict insidious harm on ourselves in God's name when we deny the innate truths of who we are in our very beings. Today, as a trans man, I live with this strange dichotomy. On the one hand, I fear that people are going to find out that I'm not really a man and they'll be angry at me for lying to them. But on the other hand, I know that I have been living a lie all my life, hiding who I really was, and that only now, living as a man, are people able to see the real me. I grew up enjoying the warmth and safety of a faith community, believing that I was loved and that I belonged. excuse me. However, once I began to speak my truth, I was judged and rejected and marginalized. Being pushed to the margins taught me a little bit about oppression, but I came to realize two things. As a lesbian, I could choose when, where, and how I wanted to be out based upon how safe I felt. In comparison, I realized, people of color or people with any visible difference couldn't choose when to be out, no matter how unsafe their surroundings. I saw my own privilege for the first time in my life. But it wasn't until I transitioned and began living in the world as a man that I began to see how differently men are treated. One of the first things that I became aware of was that people saw and listened to me. In banks, malls, stores, restaurants, people actually looked directly at me and listened to me in ways that they've never listened to me before. And I finally understood. By transitioning to male, I gained power and privilege. I went up the ladder of privilege, and I'm taken more seriously now than I ever was as a woman. And I've also realized, because of that in the same way that I've gained privilege in transitioning from female to male, trans women lose privilege when they transition from male to female. I'll never know what it's like to live as a trans woman or a trans woman of color. But I do know they face more discrimination and oppression, and they live with the fear of physical violence entrenched in hatred in ways that I will never have to face. I identify as a trans man, but I will never be biologically male. I'll never fit neatly into the box of being a man, but I don't need to. I am both masculine and feminine, and I identify and I move through this world as a man, and I'm grateful. Thank you.
Thank you, Jordan. Our fourth story is from Evan. So Evan, I would invite you. There you are there.
Hi. So I just wanted to share, I guess, a bit of my personal story and then how it relates to my ministry. So I did not grow up in the United Church either. I grew up in Community of Christ, which was formerly the Reorganized Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And growing up in that church community was amazing until I came out as queer at 17. And although my home church community was really welcoming, I had a really negative experience with a youth minister at a youth evangelism conference in America, and walked out of that conference and completely left the church. So I left the church, and around that time had come out as genderqueer, and this was in the 90s, and I came out as genderqueer because at that point the idea of fully transitioning from female to male seemed really far-fetched. I was living in poverty, I was a teen mom, and there was literally nowhere to access hormones or surgery. As time went on, things of course changed, definitely by the beginning of the millennium, and I then had medical access, and so I started hormones and started testosterone and started living as male. I also had chest surgery, and I lived as male for a number of years, and during that time was involved in a lot of youth initiatives, started some trans youth groups in Toronto that are still going today. And I found myself completely surrounded by an amazing trans community. I went to conferences all over North America with trans people, and I was really, really lucky because I had a huge amount of community support. But the one thing that remained throughout that entire time for me was knowing that the church didn't support my queer identity and definitely would not support me as a trans person. So when I was about 26, I started experiencing gender as more fluid and went to my family doctor to get a refill on my hormones, and was told that I was presenting as too feminine and that I was a legal liability and was taken off hormones with literally no warning. It wreaked havoc on my body, on my self-esteem, and at that point I had to make a decision about how I was going to go forward. And so I made the decision to continue presenting as somewhat feminine, and that's when I found a really strong femme community. And for me, femme is about the things that we consider feminine in this world, but every day I make a decision to wake up and present that way. That was really when I came into my identity as a two-spirit person. To this day, I acknowledge that in my body, I very much hold both genders. And every day, well, every moment really, I make a decision about how I will present my gender into this world. For me, going off hormones and doing what some people call detransitioning, but for me, it was really a continuation of my gender transition, caused a lot of hurt and pain. I lost a lot of the trans community. I was seen as a traitor. I didn't want to speak up about the fact that I was removed off hormones without my consent because I didn't want to jeopardize anyone else's access to hormones and surgery. So I just stayed quiet and sort of took it for a while. And over the last few years, I've really started to come out quite publicly about that, because even though I don't present as male when I walk down the street, I still live in a trans body. I live in a body that's been altered medically, that's been altered by choice, and my experience is very much still as a lived trans experience. And so I identify as transgender, I identify as a femme, and as two-spirit, and for me, that is a huge piece of my spirituality, recognizing that Creator has given me the gift of both male and female spirit, and in Aboriginal culture, two-spirit people hold a place of importance in that we have specific teachings that we hold. And so that's where I'm at. Now, I ended up getting a call to ministry about 7 years ago, and I received the call to ministry from the Spirit and then had to find a church to fulfill it in. And so I started Googling transgender and churches, and what came up was a United Church Observer article about Cindy Bourgeois. So I decided that the United Church was probably my best bet, and that's how I ended up here. For me, my experience in the church has been pretty amazing. I find that people are really open. I've been granted opportunities within the church and traveling, representing the church and the student Christian movement around the world that I never dreamed would be possible. So that's really amazing, because it's really allowed me to connect with other queer and trans people in different locations and share my story, and talk about the good news, which is that God has come for everybody, not just white, hetero, cisgendered folks. So I'm really grateful to the United Church. At the same time, I feel a lot of invisibility. I feel a lot of invisibility because I'm not recognized as trans. I find that there's not a lot of education around trans issues and genderqueer issues. And when I do come out as trans, people are really confused, especially because I've been working in churches and had babies while I was working there. So for me, I feel largely invisible as a trans person. I'm sure that there are congregations that I've worked with that don't even know that I'm trans. At the same time, I'm more vocal about it now because there's been a number of suicides. Suicide rates for trans people are super high, but I feel like in my own community and with people I know, there's been a number of deaths. I know once combined with also being Aboriginal, the suicide rates are incredibly high. And I mean, we have the good news as Christians that Jesus came to teach us how to walk on the good road, and that God's love is for absolutely everybody. So I didn't think I would ever be ordained, especially as an out queer and trans person. But by some miracle, I was, and had a lot of support from my home church, which is Wellington Square, and the minister there, Orville James. And what I love is that now in my work, I get to do ministry within the communities that I've come from. So I'm the minister at Toronto Urban Native Ministry in Toronto, and a lot of what I do is serve on the streets and in shelters and in jails. And it's really exciting because I get to go back into my own communities and give the hope that Christ gives to all of us and share that. And for me, I feel really lucky that the church has embraced me, that I have been called into really my dream job, and then I'm able to do a kind of ministry that I think a lot of people aren't because they don't have the lived experience. And so when I hear, stories like Rita's, for instance, I know what it feels like to be rejected by a church, and I want to ensure that that doesn't happen again. Not on my watch is what I always say. I don't want to bury the youth in our communities because they didn't feel supported or loved or welcomed. And I think that's our responsibility as ministers, as church members, as communities of faith, to ensure that we're educated ourselves so that we can go out into the world and be that ray of hope. Thanks.
Thank you, Evan. Thank you so much. Michiko is back with us, so we're going to try this again. So Michiko, I'm wondering if you're able to, there you are. And what about the audio?
Hello?
Yeah, yay.
It's working?
It is.
Oh, goodness. Everyone seems to have gone quiet. Is that...
Most people have their mics muted. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay, so we can
Does that mean
hear
I'm good
you.
to start?
Go for it.
Okay. Yeah, please let me know if you can't hear me. Okay. Hi, everyone. So my name is Micho, and I am currently studying to become a minister. I'm a candidate with Bay of Quinte Conference. And yeah, I'm sorry that it took me a while to get on, but everything I've heard so far has been really inspiring, and I'm really grateful for the stories that have been shared. I'm just going to share a couple quick thoughts that I've had. As someone who is studying theology, I have an interest particularly in what it means to engage in trans theology. So hopefully that will be a new sort of piece to add to today's conversation. So I think for me, an awesome thing about being trans is realizing and learning for myself and with others how many different ways there are that you can conceptualize what gender is, and to create those metaphors to express who you are in different ways. This idea that maybe gender is like a light switch that sometimes turns on or sometimes you turn it off, or it's like a volume button and there's more degrees of, how intense your gender feels some days or others. Or for some that it's a spectrum, and on one side masculine and the other side feminine, and people sit in between. And so for me, I feel like what I've come to realize is that a lot of those models don't work for me, and that can be difficult, but I'm also okay with it, because I'm starting to realize that part of this is that my gender is a journey, and the more that I can just learn and map out, the more options I have in terms of how I can creatively express what my gender is. And for me, a big part of that is reclaiming and also reimagining what it would mean for me to have a gender outside of a white Western ideology that defines a lot of the understanding of gender and sexuality I was taught growing up. That sounds pretty theoretical, so I guess I could share a bit about my everyday life. I use gender-neutral pronouns in all the spaces that I am in as often as possible. At school, I'm out and trying to encourage everyone to use they and them pronouns, all my friends, family as well. And for me, I feel like because he and she have such a weight to them in terms of gendered expectations, I really like the space that I'm given to define myself when I use they and them pronouns. It helps, for me, I feel like I'm guarded against people's assumptions about my gender. This also means, because they and them is a concept that is new to people, that I do get misgendered a lot. I do get people that don't think to ask what my pronouns are. They make assumptions and start from there. Which means that I'm in a position where I teach a lot about gender in my everyday life. And it's been an interesting process for me to learn about what it means that my ministry is one where my presence alone is an interruption to societal norms, and that I often don't get to choose when and where I sort of am in a ministry role. So that's been an interesting piece of me figuring out what it means to be trans and a minister. Another piece is that I think that being trans, and particularly identify as genderqueer, is about how I see myself in relationship to the rest of the world. And I feel that my experience of oppression as a trans person, and particularly a trans person of color, calls me to demand justice for all that experience oppression. And so when I talk about trans experiences, I try my best to always be accountable to recognize that trans people are diverse. And so if I'm talking about trans justice, I also have to talk about justice for people with disabilities, and racial justice, and indigenous justice, queer justice. The list goes on, but that for me, trans justice is comprehensive of all those things because trans people are so diverse. Yeah, I think in terms of my own call to ministry, I've come to realize that oppression in itself is it's an act of violence that has a very spiritual consequences. And being part of queer and trans communities in Toronto has made me realize just how important it is that the church is aware and is actively engaging in these issues, because there's such a great potential for so much healing that can be offered for queer and trans Christians. And even people who are queer and trans that have been hurt by the church and are looking for answers, and maybe they don't identify as Christian anymore, but I still think that that's an important space where especially the United Church can offer ministry. As someone who's been very openly queer and trans in a lot of especially youth ministry I've done, I found it's been really humbling to realize that there are many people because of that are willing to come to me and trust me, and that I am often the first contact point for a lot of people, especially youth that are questioning, to ask me for more resources, just general questions, especially around Christianity. And I think that has been an important lesson, teaching me how important it is in trans ministry, and in all ministry really, that you have to create space in order for change to happen. And you can't just be sitting somewhere thinking that you're okay and that you maybe accept people for how they are and that somehow will change things. You have to be willing to actively carve out space from a world where the norm often communicates that being trans is not okay. And you have to be willing to disrupt spaces in order to create that change. And so it's really important that people know who I am, and I feel it's important that I express myself, and that they know that as well. I care, and I care enough to respond to their questions, and I can empathize with what they're going through. Yeah, I guess one last point I want to make is that as a Christian, I feel like I've learned a lot about the ideas of what radical love is as someone who is trans. I think so much about my experience of being trans as being blessed with a community of people that are working so hard to create a world where all bodies and all shapes and sizes are understood to be divine and beautiful and loved, and that the trans community has been a place where I've experienced the true power of what it means to embody unconditional love, and I'm really grateful that that experience is something that is foundational and influences the rest of my understanding of what it means to be Christian and to do ministry. I'm just going to leave you with one last piece, which is the acknowledge that all of you came today to learn more, and that means a lot to me, that there's so many people in the United Church that are willing to learn more and engage in this issue, because trans ministry and trans justice is a lot of work. And for many people, it's about letting go of an entire worldview. And it takes a willingness to make mistakes, and that can be really hard to start that work. But I guess the good news also is that there's so many resources out there and so many people willing to teach and share, like the amazing people that have shared their stories today. And so I just want to express gratitude for the other presenters as well as all of you who have come to listen and learn. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Micho. I'm so glad that we were able to get you connected, and thank you for sharing your story. It is now 1 o'clock. And so I know I see some folks who are saying they have to leave, and thank you to everyone who has joined us. Because we got started a few minutes late, I want to give a bit of space for questions that anyone might have, and Michiko and I can facilitate that together. So I wonder, there have been a lot of wonderful comments and a lot of great discussion happening throughout the past hour. A lot of affirmations of each of our presenters and gratitude for your stories and who you are and the gifts that you each offer to the church. So want to lift that up and also give a bit of space if there are particular questions that anyone has. We'll leave a few minutes before we close in prayer. So I see Pamela saying truly grateful for all of your stories. Rita, the North is a far different environment than the South. Genevieve, thank you so much for joining, and I know many of our presenters posted information about this time on Facebook. Michiko just talked about the resources that are available, and I want to commend to each of you the resource links pod at the bottom right of your screen. There are 2 resources in there that Jordan has given us, and if there are others that folks know of or would like to be shared, you can mention that in the chat space. And just to let everyone know as well that the webinar today has been recorded, and each of you will be receiving an email, a follow-up email that will have the recording link in it. So I know we've covered a lot in the past hour, but if there are particular things you'd like to go back and revisit, then there will be a time to do that when you receive the link. So I'm seeing lots of continued affirmation and gratitude. Knox United and Brandon, we were very moved by these stories shared, and remember that we are not alone as we join in ministry together. And Bonnie saying they've learned so much about faith and transgender issues. Bonnie continues, although the UCC seems to be just, there is still bigotry and injustice in our church as well. There's still a lot of work to be done, so we need to use our resources in and outside the church, absolutely. Julie asking if we can post the recording link publicly. Yeah, absolutely, it can be shared. So Grosvenor Park United Church has a question for you specifically, Michiko, wondering about the struggle of keeping the co in your name.
Microphone is a little is not the best. Did someone just ask about my relationship with my name?
Yes, about keeping the co in your name.
Okay. Do I have time to answer that?
Yes, go for it. Yes, go for it.
Yeah, I guess I can say that the short answer is no, but I think it is important to reflect on the fact that, like, for me, my relationship with my name is part of being Japanese Canadian, and I have come to realize that when people's names or histories are more connected to their racial identity, that the idea of transitioning can often look very different, and yeah, there are very different lived experiences for trans people depending on, yeah, cultural pieces such as names.
Thanks, Michiko. So Bonnie has just had to step away, but Cindy, Bonnie has said maybe you could strategize about how to use the resources in your Presbyterian congregations. So Grosvenor Park just clarified the co means female, so that was the reference in the question there. And Cindy says absolutely, so Bonnie has stepped away, but I'll leave that up to you to connect with Bonnie there, Cindy. So it is just a few minutes after our end time, and I want to thank you all so much for joining. Jordan has just added in the resource links pod that you can email directly with any questions to trans@united-church.ca. So that is another place to share resources and to connect after this time today. So deep gratitude to all of our presenters. Thank you so much for, Jordan, were you gonna?
One thing.
Yeah, go for it.
I've enjoyed working with Michiko for 18 months over the last few years, and I wanted to thank them for the incredible inspiration they've been to me personally as a trans person, as well as a staff person at the General Council office. And I want just to let you know that that resource out there, Celebrating Gender Diversity, has been written in large part by Michiko, and there's some really, really good resources in there. So if you haven't seen it, I would encourage you to download that. Thanks, Michiko.
It was a pleasure.
Well, thank you all so very much. This has been an incredibly enriching and uplifting and meaningful time. So I want to ask Rita, if you're still there. Rita had offered to close us in prayer today.
I would love to do that. Our gracious Creator, thank you so much for moving us beyond just our own gender and moving us to be one spirit, one heart, one mind together. Thank you for not having to step away from our gender, but to be able to go beyond it. Thank you so much for the open hearts. And we ask your help with the hearts that still need our help. We ask that you help us always to keep in mind, to always give off that which we wish we were given, even if it doesn't come back. So that's what you did. We ask now that we go from here with renewed hearts, renewed purpose, and before this day ends, help us to be a blessing to some. Amen.
Thank you, Rita. Amen. And blessings to everyone.